Benaiah was not born into an ordinary story. From the moment his name was spoken, it carried the weight of destiny. Born into a priestly Levite lineage, he grew up in the shadow of the sacred, where the presence of God was not an idea, but a living reality. His father served among holy duties, guarding what was set apart for God alone. Yet from this quiet, reverent beginning emerged a man who would walk a far more dangerous path, one where faith and courage would collide in the most extraordinary ways. In the world of ancient Israel, names were never accidental. To call him Benaiah was to declare, the son of the Lord, or one favored by God. It was a name that whispered purpose long before his deeds ever spoke for him. But destiny is never fulfilled by heritage alone. Benaiah would have to choose who he would become when fear stood in front of him and obedience demanded a cost. What makes his story so compelling is not just what he did, but why he did it. Benaiah's courage did not rise from pride or ambition. It flowed from a deep-rooted faith, shaped in sacred spaces and tested in moments where hesitation meant defeat. He was a man who carried reverence in his heart and resolve in his hands, a rare balance that would place him at the center of Israel's most decisive moments. This is not just a story about strength. It is a story about conviction, about standing firm when the path is unclear and the stakes are high. As we journey through Benaiah's life, you will see how spiritual devotion can fuel extraordinary courage, and how one man's faith helped shape the destiny of a kingdom. If stories like this inspire you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful stories of faith, courage, and timeless lessons. Now, let us step into the world of Benaiah and discover how a life set apart can change history. The faith that shaped Benaiah in sacred courts did not remain confined to quiet places of prayer. It followed him into moments where the ground was unstable, the air was cold, and fear waited for even the smallest hesitation. What began as devotion was soon tested by action, and it was in these moments that Benaiah's name moved from whispered promise to living legend. Scripture does not present his courage as sudden or accidental, but as the natural expression of a life anchored in trust that did not waver when danger appeared. One winter day, when snow covered the land and silence pressed heavily upon the earth, Benaiah faced a moment that would echo through generations. A lion, driven into a pit, stood between him and retreat. In such a place, there was no space to maneuver, no safe distance, no opportunity to reconsider. The cold narrowed the breath, the slick ground offered no mercy, and yet Benaiah descended. This was not recklessness, but resolve. He stepped forward with the same confidence he had learned in sacred spaces, believing that obedience mattered more than comfort. In the narrow walls of that pit, where fear could have ruled, courage answered instead. When he emerged, the lion lay still, and the story of Benaiah gained a weight that words could scarcely contain. That moment did not stand alone. It was part of a pattern that revealed who Benaiah truly was when faced with overwhelming odds. On another day, he stood before warriors whose strength and reputation would have caused most men to withdraw. 2 champions of Moab fell by his hand, not because he sought glory, but because retreat was never his instinct when duty called. Each encounter reinforced the same truth. Benaiah did not measure his actions by the size of the threat, but by the certainty of his calling. Perhaps the most striking image comes from a battle where appearances offered no advantage. An Egyptian warrior stood before him, imposing in stature, armed with a spear that represented reach, power, and experience. Against such a figure, logic would advise distance and caution. Yet Benaiah advanced with nothing but a staff. In that decisive moment, clarity overcame fear. He closed the space between them, seized the weapon meant to end his life, and turned it into a symbol of victory. It was not speed alone, nor strength, but composure under pressure that defined the outcome. These moments did more than build a reputation. They revealed the inner structure of a man whose courage was consistent, not situational. Benaiah did not rise to bravery only when the odds were favorable. His strength showed itself most clearly when escape was possible, but faith demanded commitment. Each encounter carried the same quiet message. Courage rooted in belief does not wait for certainty. It moves forward despite uncertainty. What ties these acts together is not spectacle, but continuity. 70. The same man who learned reverence among sacred duties carried that reverence into the chaos of conflict. He did not divide his life between faith and action, but allowed one to shape the other. In Benaiah's story, courage is not loud, and victory is not boastful. It is steady, deliberate, and deeply grounded. Long before he stood beside kings or shaped the fate of a nation, these moments defined him. They forged a man whose presence inspired confidence and whose actions silenced doubt. Through snow-filled pits and unequal battles, Benaiah's life declared a truth that would follow him into every chapter that came next. When faith leads, courage follows. So here, and even the most impossible moments can become turning points in history. The stories of Benaiah's courage did not remain isolated, moments remembered only by those who witnessed them. In the world of ancient Israel, such acts traveled quickly, carried by soldiers returning from battle and whispered through the ranks of the army. Yet what drew the attention of King David was not merely the strength behind those victories, but the consistency of the man who stood behind them. Courage can appear in a single moment, but loyalty reveals itself over time, and Benaiah displayed both with a steadiness that set him apart from the rest. David understood courage better than most. He had once faced a giant with nothing but a sling and conviction, and he knew the difference between reckless boldness and faith-driven resolve. When he looked upon the men who surrounded him, he sought hearts that would remain firm when the throne itself was threatened. Benaiah proved, battle after battle, that he was such a man. He did not seek recognition, nor did he retreat when the cost of loyalty grew heavy. His presence in the ranks brought order, calm, and an unspoken assurance that he would not turn away when others faltered. Over time, Benaiah's role shifted from warrior to guardian. Trust was built not through ceremony, but through shared danger and proven faithfulness. When David's life was most vulnerable, it was men like Benaiah who stood closest, forming a living shield around the king. To be entrusted with command of the personal guard was not a matter of rank alone. It was a declaration that David saw in Benaiah a man whose loyalty could be trusted beyond question, whose judgment would not bend under pressure, and whose courage would not fail in the presence of threat. The king's inner circle was a place where strength alone was never enough. Those who stood there carried the weight of constant responsibility, knowing that a single moment of hesitation could alter the course of a nation. Benaiah accepted this burden quietly. He did not posture for influence or push himself forward. Instead, he allowed his actions to speak, reinforcing trust through consistency rather than display. In a court filled with ambition, his steadiness became his defining mark. As David's reign faced turmoil from within, this trust was tested in ways no battlefield could prepare a man for. When loyalty became a choice rather than a duty, many revealed the limits of their devotion. Benaiah did not. His allegiance to David was not tied to comfort, success, or public approval. It was rooted in a conviction that leadership deserved protection, even when the path ahead was uncertain. This unwavering stance drew him closer to the heart of power, not because he sought it, but because stability required men like him. To command the king's guard meant standing at the crossroads of danger and authority. Benaiah became the one who moved without hesitation when threats arose, the one whose presence reassured allies and warned adversaries. He learned to read the silence before conflict, to sense unrest before it surfaced, and to act with precision rather than impulse. In these moments, His earlier trials found their purpose. The discipline formed in sacred spaces and sharpened in battle now served the preservation of the kingdom itself. Through all of this, Benaiah remained unchanged at his core. He did not abandon humility for influence, nor faith for power. Instead, he carried both into every responsibility entrusted to him. His rise into David's inner circle was not the result of a single heroic act, but the culmination of a life lived with integrity. And in being entrusted with the king's personal guard, Benaiah became more than a warrior. He became a symbol of what steadfast loyalty looks like when faith, courage, and responsibility converge. The measure of loyalty is rarely taken in moments of strength. It is revealed when authority begins to shake and the future grows uncertain. For Benaiah, the trials that defined his legacy did not come only from the clash of steel, but from seasons when allegiance demanded sacrifice rather than applause. The courage that once carried him into a snowy pit now guided him through darker, quieter battles where the enemy was not a visible threat, but the temptation to choose safety over faithfulness. When Absalom rose against his father, the kingdom felt the fracture deep within its own heart. A son claimed what was not his, drawing followers with promises and appearances that masked the cost of rebellion. Streets that once echoed with loyalty grew uneasy, and the weight of uncertainty pressed upon every man who served the throne. David, forced to leave Jerusalem, walked away not as a conquering king, but as a wounded father, carrying grief alongside responsibility. In such a moment, many paused, calculating which side would prevail, measuring loyalty against survival. Benaiah did not pause. As David crossed into exile, Benaiah stood with him, not in defiance or anger, but with a quiet resolve that spoke louder than any declaration. His loyalty was not dramatic, yet it was unmistakable. He followed the king into uncertainty, guarding him through the long days when victory felt distant, and the cost of allegiance was painfully clear. In the wilderness, away from the safety of the city, Benaiah's presence became a steady reassurance that faithfulness had not vanished from the kingdom, even when betrayal seemed close at hand. When the conflict reached its end and Absalom fell, the aftermath demanded a different kind of courage. David's heart was torn between the sorrow of a father and the responsibility of a ruler, and those around him had to navigate that fragile space with care. Benaiah remained aligned with the king's authority, respecting both the grief and the justice required to restore order. His loyalty did not falter when emotions ran high, nor did it harden into cruelty. It remained disciplined, grounded, and purposeful. Years later, as David's strength faded, another challenge emerged, quieter but no less dangerous. Adonijah moved in subtle confidence, gathering supporters and presenting himself as king before the throne had truly changed hands. The court became a place of whispers and calculated alliances, where ambition tempted many to shift their loyalty toward what seemed inevitable. Once again, Benaiah stood apart. He did not attend the false celebration, nor did he lend his silence to deception. His absence spoke clearly. His allegiance had not moved. When David acted to secure Solomon's rightful place, Benaiah was among the trusted few who ensured that the king's command could not be undone. He stood at the center of a fragile moment where the future of the kingdom balanced on obedience and timing. As Solomon was publicly affirmed, the illusion of Adonijah's claim dissolved, and those who had wavered scattered in fear. Through it all, Benaiah remained steady, his loyalty acting as a shield around the transition of power. What sets Benaiah apart in these moments is not simply that he chose the rightful king, but that he did so when the outcome was uncertain. His allegiance was not shaped by convenience or public opinion. It was rooted in conviction, formed long before the crisis arrived. Whether walking beside David in exile or standing firm as Solomon rose to the throne, Benaiah demonstrated that true loyalty does not wait for clarity. It commits in advance. These seasons of rebellion revealed the depth of the man behind the reputation. The warrior known for fearless deeds proved equally unshakable in the realm of trust and responsibility. In moments when others wavered, Benaiah stood firm, showing that the same courage that faces danger openly is also required to guard faithfulness in times of quiet but profound uncertainty. When Solomon ascended the throne, the kingdom did not immediately enter calm. The echoes of rebellion still lingered in the corridors of power, and unresolved loyalties threatened to reopen wounds that had nearly torn Israel apart. In this fragile moment, Solomon needed more than wisdom. He needed stability, and stability required action taken with clarity rather than hesitation. Benaiah, whose loyalty had already been proven in darker hours, now stood at the center of this responsibility, carrying not ambition but obligation. The first shadow came from Joab, a man whose strength had once helped secure David's reign, but whose allegiance had fractured when succession was tested. Joab was not an enemy from outside the kingdom. He was a reminder that influence without faithfulness could undermine everything a nation stood for. Solomon understood that the throne could not rest on divided loyalties, and when judgment was required, it was entrusted to Benaiah. This was no personal rivalry, nor an act of vengeance. It was a sober duty, carried out to close a chapter that could no longer remain open. In fulfilling this command, Benaiah demonstrated that loyalty to the throne meant placing the future of the kingdom above personal history. With Joab removed, the court did not fully exhale, for ambition had not yet been silenced. Adonijah, whose earlier claim to the throne had already threatened civil division, returned with a quieter but equally dangerous move. He sought legitimacy through symbols rather than declarations, attempting to revive a claim that had already been settled. To an untrained eye, the request appeared harmless, but Solomon recognized it for what it was, a challenge to the order that had been established at great cost. Once again, the responsibility fell to Benaiah. His role was not to debate motives, but to enforce the decision that protected the kingdom from sliding back into uncertainty. With this act, the last serious rival to the throne was removed, and the line of succession was secured. Still, one more test remained, less dramatic in appearance but deeply symbolic in meaning. Shimei, who had once spoken against David during the king's weakest hour, had been granted mercy under strict conditions. That mercy carried with it an expectation of restraint and respect for authority. When Shimei broke his word, he did more than violate a command. He challenged the principle that promises made before the throne mattered. Solomon could not ignore such defiance without weakening the foundation of his rule. Benaiah was again entrusted with the task of enforcement, not because he sought such roles, but because he carried them out without personal bias or hesitation. Through these moments, a pattern became unmistakably clear. Benaiah was not acting as a symbol of fear, nor as an extension of unchecked power. He functioned as a stabilizing force in a time when restraint and decisiveness had to exist together. His actions prevented resentment from growing into rebellion and ambiguity from becoming chaos. Each judgment served the same purpose, to protect the unity of the kingdom and affirm that authority, once established, would not be undermined from within. What is striking is not simply what Benaiah did, but how he did it. He did not speak loudly in the court, nor did he seek recognition for carrying out difficult commands. His loyalty remained consistent, whether the task placed him beside a king in battle or required him to act in the tense stillness of royal judgment. The courage that once faced visible danger now expressed itself through obedience to responsibility that carried heavy consequences. By the time these matters were settled, Solomon's throne stood on firmer ground. The internal fractures that had threatened to destabilize the kingdom were closed, not through force alone, but through unwavering commitment to order and faithfulness. In this, Benaiah became more than a commander or guardian. He became the living assurance that loyalty, when guided by integrity, can preserve peace where compromise would only invite collapse. As the story of Benaiah draws to a close, what remains is not the image of a single battle or a moment of triumph, but the portrait of a life lived with unwavering purpose, from sacred beginnings to moments where the fate of a kingdom hung in the balance. Benaiah consistently chose courage over fear, integrity over convenience, and loyalty over personal gain. His strength was never defined solely by what he overcame, but by what he refused to abandon when the cost of faithfulness grew heavy. Benaiah's journey reminds us that history is not shaped by kings alone. Thrones may carry authority, but they depend on those who stand beside them with steady hands and clear conviction. In times of peace, such loyalty can go unnoticed. Yet in seasons of upheaval, when uncertainty spreads and allegiances shift, it is the faithful servant who becomes the quiet foundation of stability. Benaiah never sought the crown, yet his actions protected it. He never claimed power for himself, yet his resolve preserved the future of a nation. What makes his legacy timeless is how closely it reflects the struggles we still face today. We may not stand in royal courts or guard ancient thrones, but we are all tested in moments when the easier path tempts us to compromise what we know is right. Benaiah's life shows that integrity is not proven by words spoken in calm moments, but by choices made when silence would be safer and resistance more costly. His courage was not loud, but it was unyielding, shaped by faith and sustained by purpose. Through shifting reigns, internal conflict, cabalisms and uncertain transitions, Benaiah remained the same. He adapted to changing roles without surrendering his values, proving that true loyalty does not depend on circumstance. Whether serving David in exile or enforcing justice under Solomon, his commitment did not waver. In a world where ambition often disguises itself as wisdom, his steadfastness stands as a reminder that leadership is not about reaching the highest position, but about protecting what is entrusted to you. As we reflect on Benaiah's life, we are invited to ask ourselves deeper questions. When loyalty is tested, where do we stand? When integrity demands sacrifice, will we remain firm? His story challenges us to believe that faithfulness still matters and that courage, grounded in conviction, can shape outcomes far beyond what we see in the moment. Thank you for taking the time to journey through this powerful story. If Benaiah's life has inspired or encouraged you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing meaningful stories that explore courage, faith, and timeless lessons. Stay with us for more journeys into history and scripture, and until next time, may you walk with strength, integrity, and the courage to stand firm when it matters most.